Houston Cougars, a furious comeback to knock off Duke and advance to the national championship game.
Here is Zion Chris, big hole, open sesame. Zion Chris, wow, the 72-yard house call.
Stick it in your pipe and smoke it, baby. Yes!
Welcome to the Scott Holland Podcast, back here after a Cougar week that featured something we don't see very often, more specifically a men's basketball loss. But for those of us that watched it, including you and I, we're going to talk about that tonight. Don't think it was a game that you can leave with any real strong negatives about. If your priors are changed about this team, frankly, you were just looking for them to be changed, which I would say also if this had been, instead of a 3-point loss, a 3-point win, I think we're very much on the same page about that. Big men's hoops weeks to come as well. A week that I know we've said before, as recently as 9-10 years ago, it would have been inconceivable that we were going to be playing Arizona and Kansas in conference for basketball, same conference, which that would have taken some explaining for me 9 or 10 years ago too. Like, wait, us, Arizona and Kansas, same conference? Yeah. Would have needed to be caught up on that one a bit. And games where the Cougars could absolutely win both, even though this is two very difficult opponents. We'll talk about that. A lot of bat and ball sports positivity as well. Very good weekend for both the baseball and softball team early in their seasons that we're going to talk about tonight. Country club sports, as they often are, well represented here as tennis finishes out non-conference. Men's golf season preview as well as their season has just gotten underway. Bobby, so much Cougar sports. That's the great thing about this time of year. So little time to talk it, but glad to do it with you. How you doing, friend?
Coming off a crazy work weekend, but overall, super excited to talk Cougar sports, even though, like you said, we're coming off a loss here. That's just a fun basketball game, and we'll obviously get more into it. But yeah, coming off that long holiday weekend for me in retail, it can be a little strenuous, but happy to talk Cougar sports with you, buddy.
No doubt. And going to mention very quickly, because we have a lot of Cougar sports to get to, if you want to support the work that Bobby and I do here on a weekly basis, talking everything in the University of Houston's athletic department, go to patreon.com/shpodcast. One more time, patreon.com/shpodcast. We just dropped a bonus basketball episode about the Iowa State game, getting the immediate, right off the final, Bobby and Sam reaction to that basketball game. That is certainly going to be picking up here in the next few weeks as we get to the business end of the basketball season. If any of that sounds good to you, if the thought of supporting the work that we do here sounds good to you, one more time, patreon.com/shpodcast. Naturally leading off with men's hoops tonight. And we'll lead off with our first and certainly least or less, I guess the least notable of the two men's basketball games that have occurred in the past week, from last Saturday afternoon at home against a woeful K-State team, and what ended up being the final game of Jerome Tang's time in charge of that program, which I don't think I foresaw coming into last weekend. Tough start to a game where the Cougs couldn't buy a basket. JoJo Tugler got in almost immediate foul trouble, and K-State led as much as 15-6 before the Cougs went on a 33-4 run that lasted from just after the under 12 media timeout through the early stage of the second half. Basically ensured that we weren't going to see anything on Saturday but a Cougar win. K-State did make the deficit a bit more respectable, mainly with PJ Haggerty getting buckets after this game was decided, but a lot of garbage time in that one. Maybe allowed K-State to speed up the tempo in the later possession. Certainly not your cleanest Houston Cougar men's basketball game, but I'm going to take my cue from Kelvin Sampson, who said afterwards, and I'm paraphrasing it a bit here, that he wasn't going to spend any time that night thinking about how the Cougs won this game and let any minor annoyances I have with how the actual basketball happened trickle away from my consciousness. Bobby, what are your big takeaways from the win over K-State at home?
Yeah, just kind of a weird start for the Cougs. Couldn't find the basket. K-State jumped out early. And to be honest, you had every reason to kind of get a little concerned with the way that the Cougs were shooting, the way K-State was shooting, and then kind of what you had coming up on Monday with the Iowa State game. Not that we've ever seen Sampson teams really fall into this problem, right, of a classic trap game. But if there is a classic trap game scenario, this one really felt like it was leading up to that. Leading into the game, Kansas State's Coach Jerome Tang laid into his team and really was like, no one deserves to play here. I'm embarrassed for the university. I'm embarrassed to coach this basketball team. There's guys on this team who won't be on the team next year. And the Cougs had this big matchup with Iowa State. Classic. They bounced from that. They have the emotions from that come out and look really good. And the Cougs are looking forward to Iowa State. You had that opportunity. It kind of felt that way early on, but the Cougs reeled Kansas State back in. And I know initially you and I kind of had a different thoughts on this game. This was a very frustrating game for you, which I don't want to, spoil everything you're gonna talk about. But if and stop me if I'm wrong. I thought you were pretty frustrated by it, but I can see how you got there. This isn't a very good Kansas State team. In fact, their coach just got fired. To me, it felt like a game where you jumped out early and you just kind of got complacent. You just kind of were like, "Oh, we're up big," and then they kind of reel you back in a little bit. I think they cut it down to 9 at one point, maybe 10. I can't remember off the top of my head.
I believe they did. It was brief, but I think they did get it down to like single digits, but I don't think anything closer than like 9 or 10.
Yeah, and then I think we jumped right back out to like 14, something like that. You took your foot off the gas and won the game. You held them to their lowest half of points in school history. It was tied with a game earlier this season, I believe they said on the broadcast. I don't love giving up 45 in the second half to this Kansas State team. But then again, you did put up 45 in the same half, so it's not like they, made it close or something like that. Your rotation went 11 deep. Isaiah Harwell and Khalifa Sacco each got you 19 minutes. And no one besides Sharp was really in foul trouble. So it's clear Sampson felt enough in control of this game to kind of get some guys some minutes overall. So that's kind of my overarching thoughts on this game, was that while there were some ugly parts, it really felt like your number twos playing their number ones in order for them to make it even kind of close.
Yeah, I think you accurately described how I felt from about, we'll say, like 3 p.m. Pacific time to 4 p.m. when my significant other and I went to the not to dox where I live, but shout out the Costco on Buffalo in 215. Not that far from where you were for a recent work trip out here, which is to say, not very frustrated now. Like I can objectively recognize the areas of this basketball game where the Cougs didn't play well, but it's almost kind of cheating because you know how the Iowa State game immediately after this one went. Even in a loss, it's easy now to look at K-State as kind of an isolated thing, an ugly, not very pretty effort, but not one worth any kind of larger concerns about in terms of, hey, is this a long-term decline in form from this team? Well, no, because they played a well inside the top 10 team extremely close on their court 2 days later. It's easy to look at it kind of the way you did, as, hey, let your foot off the gas, kind of got complacent, healthy amount of second team guys getting minutes, because I don't know, man, it's not worth burning your starters just because you want more style points and a win over K-State that, quite honestly, nobody's got to remember within a couple weeks from now, other than just, oh, hey, it's a trivia question. It was Jerome Tang's last game. It will talk a little bit about him, obviously focusing on the Cougars as a Cougar podcast, but it is kind of funny that, like, damn, that was his last game. One where K-State actually, I would say, somewhat, like, never really were in it, but somewhat overplayed, like, the projections of how they would do this game. They're like, it obviously not, like, this game was not even remotely in the picture of why he got fired. Just kind of a funny coincidence that those two things lined up. In terms of praising individual players, I'm going to start in an unconventional place, but you're not going to be surprised where I start. I'm going to join in the larger Cougar chorus of people praising said lot, who got some really key minutes in the first half when you had both Tugler and Khalifa Sacco in foul trouble. Won't overstate it, but at that point in time, you really needed 4 or 5 good minutes from said, and you got it in spades. And I'm glad to see this was widely noticed by the Cougar fans in the venue and out on the World Wide Web. If you want a stat that illustrates how this game was ugly, or, the Cougar contribution to that, collectively, the Cougs had 18 assists and 15 turnovers. And those turnovers, I would say, were pretty backloaded to the second half. Because I believe at halftime, I remember seeing a graphic coming out that was like 11-3 in terms of K-State turnovers to U of H turnovers. So 12 of the second half, I believe. And if you'll recall, for all the shooting struggles you had in the opening 20 minutes of the game, the reason, or one of the biggest reasons you were up at the half, is that you had done such a good job turning a K-State team who's been quite turnover prone over. And yeah, right there, one of the biggest reasons that you went to the half with a pretty comfortable lead. And so maybe that's why for 30 to 45 minutes, I felt a little sour at the end of this game, because you're just not used to this Cougar team turning the ball over. Like, this is still, as we record tonight, the number one team in turnover percentage in the country. And yeah, you were very much correct when I said, hey, like, I believe what I said to you was, if you come out like this against Iowa State, you're going to get your butt kicked. And you said, but we won't. And I my credit, I agree with you. I was like, yeah. Like, they probably won't. If you want some positive foreshadowing from this game, low-key good Miles Uzan game against K-State. And we know he followed up with, I think, a pretty good game at Iowa State. So they're taking care of the ball specifically. 8 assists and 0 turnovers against K-State, a game where outside of Milos, you struggled turning the ball over. Followed up 2 nights later by another good game, I think, taking care of the ball against Iowa State. I just don't have a ton on the actual basketball game relative to the volume that you and I usually have for a Big 12 men's basketball recap. Ugly at times, but you spent most of the last 30 minutes with some level of commanding lead. Didn't at any point truly let K-State back in this game look like you were going to do anything but win. And we have to acknowledge, ugly basketball wins are part of the wonderful tapestry of this period of Cougar men's basketball. Being one of the most consistently excellent programs in the sport does require an ugly win or two. And last Saturday was a reminder how spoiled I've been by not just how dominant Cougar men's basketball has been, but actually aesthetically pleasing we've been at times with really good guards. You know, the likes of Quentin Grimes, Marcus Sasser, Jamal Shed, now Emmanuel Sharp and Kingston Flemings and Miles Uzan. You've had a lot of that, and just, you got went ugly sometimes. And you did that certainly last Saturday. I'm going to do the thing we hate and talk about the officials, but I'll keep it moving on this one, I promise, if you don't mind. Mm-hmm. I want to preface it by saying the officiating has nothing to do with U of H's specific struggles. I am in no way conflating the two things. These happened independently of each other, but the reffing in this one was terrible. There were stretches where they would let both teams play extremely physically. I feel like in the early second half this happened a lot. Then stretches where both teams get called for very ticky touch fouls. I don't know what Tang did to earn his technical. History would tell you he was probably good for the T, but both the technical fouls on Khalifa Sacco and K-State's Doran Buka were absurdly soft. Softer than I've seen in any U of H game in the current season. And again, not blaming the refs for U of H's general stretches of not playing to standard, but it made this basketball game, which was already not a great watch because of that, an absolutely terrible watch. And just, it looked like a crew that didn't know how to manage the game. I can excuse the 44 foul calls and the tons of free throws because, I mean, we previewed this game. These were two teams that fouled a lot. It's the 2 technical fouls and the general management of the game that still has me shaking my head 4 days later about this one.
Yeah, like you said, I don't love complaining about officials, but those 2 techs, and I'm okay complaining about officials as long as you don't blame them for your losses. That's what always bothers me. We can safely say that both of those techs, the U of H,
and that was Doran Buka's 5th. They fouled him out on that non-T. Yeah. That's insane.
Yeah, it was absolutely horrendous. Those 2 tech calls, even the one that benefited the Cougs.
And I mean, we won't get too in the weeds about this in the coming game. There are pitfalls when you have a crew full of guys who believe they're celebrity refs, like the Kip Kissingers and the Doug Sermons and Roger Ayers, like that. You go too far that direction, and you get guys who think they're in some ways and in some moments the stars of the game. But I would still rather that crew every time over this one, because you could tell these guys just couldn't manage U of H or K-State effectively, and it just made the game worse for it. Much to our surprise, not 24 hours after this one went final, K-State dismissed head coach Jerome Tang. And we're not a national college basketball, we're obviously a K-State podcast, so I think we'll keep it quick on this. But weird timing doing this mid-season. As bad as most of this K-State season has been, and just kind of amusing that off of a loss that was probably the most competitive game Jerome Tang era K-State has played against U of H. I mean, completely reasonable firing for basketball reasons. You said it, I said it in the preview. You can't go from great in year one to one of the worst teams in this program's 21st century history by year 4 and expect to keep your job. I think we're also aligned in the fact that probably not reasonable that K-State has indicated that they're going to try to fire Tang for cause to avoid paying his massive buyout. And the cause is essentially that in his post-game remarks after their previous game to this one, the blowout home loss to Cincy, Tang called the performance essentially embarrassing, was very critical of his team, and sorry, in no universe is that anything close to being worthy of firing for cause. I'm not a lawyer, but as I understand it, firing for cause requires significant provable wrongdoing either in Tang's personal life or wrongdoing or dereliction of duty in his job as the head basketball coach of K-State. Unless K-State is saving some big bombshell for later, which I personally doubt, feels like a pretty hollow threat, and one that if I'm Tang's lawyer, I'll laugh at and say, see you in court, buddy. And Tom Mars, who's kind of notorious for being a lawyer to head coaches in these kind of disputes, has already been retained by Jerome Tang and has said as much publicly. Won't dwell on it, but I think that was something both you and I said. Like, it's I'm not a huge fan of The Office. I like it, but it's that scene where Michael Scott is on, like, he's on a conference call.
It's because I don't like him.
We can fire for cause. Well, what's the cause, Michael? It's because I don't like him. And that's essentially what K-State's trying to do. And I don't know if you can get an $18 million buyout that way.
Yeah, for me, I think I didn't think they were going to fire him at the end of this year with that buyout, let alone. And then it's so clearly a play to say, we're giving you nothing, we're firing you for cause because of this, to get Jerome Tang to go, well, hold on. Well, I'll take 12. What about 12? I don't need the full 18. I need there. It really is saying it's for this to get a negotiation for a cheaper buyout. That's all it is.
It is. It feels needlessly aggressive, and also in setting up for the lawyer to be like, okay, we'll see you in court, like, and just like no negotiation, and we'll get it from a judge that you have to pay us 18.7 or whatever stupid dollar amount they owe Jerome Tang. Yep. Back to the Cougs here, though. Of course, we're going to go next to Ames, Iowa, as the Cougs went head-to-head in what was an absolute heavyweight fight on Big Monday last night against Iowa State at Hill Coliseum. Ultimately, as you know if you're listening, a heartbreaking 70-67 loss, but a loss that, as I said in the very beginning of this episode, that I don't think any Coug fan should take anything in the way of serious negatives out of that 40 minutes of basketball. Certainly, it hurts to be up 63-53 with well under 10 minutes left in the game and still not find a way to see out the win. Because really at that point, Bobby, as I sat on my couch watching, I started to let myself believe and told myself, hey, we're really about to maybe win this game, and obviously didn't end up happening. As we know, though, supremely difficult opponent, supremely difficult place to win a game, and you still saw plenty of positives. I think a short list of them here. Another sublime performance from Kingston Flemings. Not even close to the first time this season in a big moment against a ranked opponent, but still great to see from him. Emmanuel Sharp hitting the absurd shots that we've almost taken for granted that Sharp will hit in his 4 years now on court for the Cougars. And in this game, a guy whose presence and absence, the absence did loom large, were very much felt. Defensively, not your best performance, but neither Milan Momcilovic nor Joshua Jefferson really took over this game beyond Jefferson going nuclear in the first several minutes of the first half. Bobby, how are you feeling after that tough, close loss from last night?
Yeah, I think I sent this to you earlier today, maybe last night, I can't remember. And I haven't really found a better way to describe my feelings about this game, but this was just two really good basketball teams playing each other. I don't think they necessarily did anything better than us. We didn't do anything really better than them. I think if you want to find a real head scratcher, you can look at points off turnovers. Cougs turned the ball over 7 times, and Iowa State gets 12 points off of that. Cougs get 3 turnovers and get 0 points off of them. And the 3 attempts were a 3 that was like not really contested, but it wasn't like a setup shot. You know, it wasn't like a set shot where it was a catch and shoot. It was like catch, dribble once or twice, then put up the shot. And then, if I recall, I think it was Milos got one and he went down, and for some reason there were 3 guys around him and he put it up and caught the bottom of the rim like it was, or it got blocked, something like that. Like it was just bad shot selection on those 3 turnovers. The final 7 minutes of this game getting 4 points, that simply won't cut it. It can't happen. It just cannot happen. Someone at that point has got to get to the bucket and score. And that's where you expect your senior leadership to do that and to step up. That's why you're so excited when you keep Milos, when you keep Manuel, right? Who's that dog this year that just says, you know what, final 5, you're putting the ball in my hand, and it's Kingston Flemings, right? We can agree that that's probably Kingston Flemings. It gets concerning, though, because he is still a freshman. You saw points in this game, especially early on, where Milos was the primary ball handler, bringing the ball up the court, because that's a tough place to play. It's loud. That's a lot for a freshman, man. Especially, you see a bunch of these like stud freshmen that everyone talks about this year. They're not primary ball handlers, right? And so to go into a Hilton Coliseum and to have to ask a freshman to be the primary ball handler there, or to be that guy in the final 5 minutes of a basketball game, that's hard to do when you don't see many freshmen be that guy on a team. It's very rare that it happens. I'm not saying that it doesn't happen, but that guy who brings the ball up to get the ball in his hand final 5 minutes of the game on the road like that, it's tough to find, and you really hope that your seniors can do that. Now, Emmanuel Sharp was in foul trouble, and I think you pointed out on the premium episode, he came back in and he was clearly cold. Like, I think you pointed this out. Yeah, it was definitely last night. And I didn't even think about it until like you said it. And I was like, no, he clearly came back in and he was cold, man. He just, I went through and I think he missed his final 2 or 3 shots. And they weren't good misses either. They were hard clanks off the rim.
You can see he's kind of pressing almost.
Yeah. And you got 4 weeks to figure out the scoring droughts and how you take it from 7 minutes with 4 points down to 5 minutes with 4 points. And you can still, like, I'm not saying you're not going to have scoring droughts. When you play good teams and good defenses, they're going to stop you from scoring. Like, that's going to happen. But how do you score 8 points in the final 7 minutes, right? How do you score 4 points in 5 minutes instead of 7 minutes, and maybe you get 2 more buckets in there? So like, those are the things you're trying to figure out, and that's what you have 4 weeks to figure out. You also have to get more from your bench. The bench scoring was atrocious. You cannot have Isaiah Harwell getting 16 minutes and getting 3 points. If that's going to happen, we got to bring somebody else in. I'm not saying Isaiah Harwell can't be that guy, right? But bring Mercy in, and not saying Mercy Miller had this amazing game. Had one of the best dunks I've seen in a very long time. But you got to figure out who that 6th man is, and you got 4 weeks to do it.
I mean, and you already kind of alluded to this, but I think Sharp is part of the answer to that question of, hey, like, guy in a key moment who gets you a bucket, but also he was missing a good chunk of that critical stretch in the second half when Iowa State was able to get back in this game because he was sitting with 4 fouls. Like, this wasn't an issue of, Emmanuel Sharp should have been on the floor. I mean, you can't bring that guy in with 4 fouls until like after the under 4 or right at the under 4. You can't risk having 5 or 6 minutes left in the game, and you left Emmanuel Sharp out there to get his 5th foul. Glad you mentioned the bench. I mean, if you want to talk about difference-making performances in a game that was decided by an extremely tight margin, ISU had 3 different bench guys who contributed just on their own far more offensively than anyone who came off the bench for the Cougs. Nate Heisey had 11 points, made all 3 of his attempts beyond the arc, including that enormous late 3-pointer. Freshman Jamarian Burton, who had a big 3 late when Iowa State was getting back in it / getting just enough to win the game. I believe he took over, Bateman did, for Killian Torre, another Iowa State freshman who was kind of struggling at times down the stretch. I thought Bateman played good defense in the later stages of this game as well. And fellow freshman Dominicus Plata, who had 8 points and was 3 of 4 from the field. I mean, U of H played 3 more guys off the bench than Iowa State. So that's 6 total. And in that total of 6 guys, you still combined for only 3 made shots. You made so few shots, and I did this last night of the premium pod, that I basically remember all 3 makes from U of H bench guys. You had that awesome Mercy Miller dunk, which you said it. I'd imagine any Cougar fan who watched this game will remember it. a dunk by Khalifa Sacco on a super late in the shot clock, Kingston Fleming's feed that was about to expire. Really nice play. And then Isaiah Harwell making an open corner three in the second half. If we're talking about concerns I have coming out of this game, it's a pretty short list. And it's not this concern prompted by the Iowa State game specifically, but it's not overreacting to point out what you and I have here. This team really isn't getting much from its bench offensively, at least consistently. And I'm not going to belabor the point or pick on these guys very much, but just say it. 2 of your bench guards, probably your 2 first-choice bench guards, because I think McCarthy's more a forward. Ramon Walker Jr. and Isaiah Harwell are both shooting under 30% from the field in Big 12 play. And man, one of those overlooked great things on last year's team was having Malik Wilson and Javier Francis off the bench, and those guys now graduated. And all respect to Khalifa Sacco, who has certainly become a better player than I expected he'd be as recently as a couple months ago. But fair to say at this point, you're a bit worse in the bench than you were 11, 12 months ago. And that's a big problem to figure out. I know I said earlier some good things about the Cougar defensive performance, and I'm not walking that back entirely, but one of those stats that smacks you in the face is one that you mentioned, that in the entirety of this basketball game, the Cyclones only had 3 turnovers. And I mean, it's hard to beat any good opponent, but especially this Iowa State team, without them either going absolutely cold shooting, which I think is a lot to ask when they're playing at Hilton, or being a bit more disruptive defensively. And you just couldn't really do it on Monday night. And that's not really a large-scale criticism of this Cougar team. And I know saying, oh, well, they should just be more disruptive and force more turnovers is basically the defensive equivalent of the guy who says, well, U of H should be scheming up more easy 2-pointers and easy dunks. Yeah, no shit, Sherlock. But it didn't also help. Like you said, you didn't get a basket from any of those limited 3 turnovers. And you could drive yourself insane in a super close loss like this one, looking at this specific thing or that specific thing, assigning blame to that specific thing for swinging this 3-point outcome. But it was going to be hard to win this game if you didn't at least get some disruption against Iowa State. And you really couldn't just do it on a regular basis. Yes, a little bit of that is the fact that you got a quick whistle, but I mean, that's going to happen. Like you got to deal with that. That's part of the issue. And I don't believe officiating is why you didn't force turnovers. Sublime performance from Kingston. He's basically become a lock in the biggest games of this U of H season to rise to the moment. I knew watching this after he hit, I can't remember if it was his second or third shot. It was as U of H was kind of clawing back down from that early 15-5 deficit that Iowa State had. I knew we were in for another good Kingston performance. You saw him hit those 2 shots after, I think, 2 not very characteristic games for Kingston against Utah and K-State immediately prior to this one. You're like, okay, he's come to play. And I try not to throw out the superlatives too hastily, but we're watching greatness every time the young man in the number 4 jersey takes the court for U of H. He is so good. He, at times, I'm not going to say it was solely him, because obviously Emmanuel Sharp contributed a lot. Chris Sanak, I thought, had a really strong second half specifically. But I'll double down what I said earlier. No player on either team, in my opinion, loomed larger than Emmanuel Sharp, both when he was on the floor and not on the floor. And unfortunately, the not on the floor part of this is important. And this was the fewest minutes Sharp has played in a Big 12 game, save for that 30-point blowout over Arizona State. I mean, this is a bad night not to have Emmanuel Sharp out there for a lot of minutes. If you had told me before the game, hey, neither JoJo nor Sanak will be in foul trouble, I would have been very stoked. But if you had told me, hey, Emmanuel Sharp's going to only play 25 minutes, I would have gone back to being very not stoked, Bobby, because
yeah, exactly.
You're going to feel that when you are missing him for 15 minutes of a basketball game, when you don't have a guy in Sharp whose 3-point range opens things up for his teammates, the most reliable free throw shooter in the Big 12 as well. Like, you're just going to feel that drop off when you have Isaiah Harwell. Even if Isaiah Harwell's playing better right now, you're going to feel a drop off when Isaiah Harwell is having to take minutes from Emmanuel Sharp because he's on the bench with 4 fouls. And then that was a big thing from this game. If you want to look at what really sabotaged the Cougars or held them back from being able to win this one, it's you didn't get 35 minutes from Emmanuel Sharp. You needed 35 minutes from the likes of Emmanuel Sharp and Kingston and Milos Uzan. You got it from Uzan and Flemings, but you can get it from Sharp. And I think as much as any one thing, that's why we're talking about Cougar loss.
Yeah, not to put everything on Emmanuel Sharp getting into foul trouble, but
No.
yeah, when you have one of your best players And his fouls and what he means offensively is different than like JoJo Tugler. Like with JoJo Tugler, when he gets into foul trouble, like it completely changes your defense. And Emmanuel Sharp, when he fouls out, you saw if he's going to get into foul trouble like that, you have to have your lack of bench scoring really puts you into trouble, right? Whereas if JoJo fouls out offensively, you still got Khalifa Sacco, who, while not a killer by any means, but he can give you offensively kind of what JoJo gives you offensively, so you don't have as much of a step back. I feel like there's a bigger drop between Emmanuel Sharp and Isaiah Harwell than there is, JoJo Tugler to Khalifa Sacco, both on offensive and defensive side.
It's still wild because even as we talked about, getting virtually nothing offensively from your bench, even missing Sharp for almost 40% of this basketball game, you almost found a way to beat Iowa State in Ames. And no moral victories, but say what we've both, I think, said here. Nobody with any brain cells thinks any differently of this year's Houston Cougar men's basketball team because they lost by 3 at a top 10 team who still hasn't lost at home this year. It's frustrating because the nature of being a fan of a team that loses, which is thankfully still pretty rare around these parts for Cougar men's basketball, the nature of it is to delight in wins and be frustrated or whatever your emotion du jour is about the losses. But I mean, like you said, and I said this at the top of the show, if this was a 3-point win where one or two more things breaks the Cougs' way, obviously you and I are happier about it. But that also shouldn't have been a situation where people change their opinions about this Cougar team. Close loss, painful loss, but like the ugly one against K-State, one that I don't believe will be indicative of anything other than just how hard it is to win at Iowa State. The same way it's extremely hard anytime an opponent comes to Fertitta Center. Just two good teams played a very close game, one that I'm sure the people who didn't have an ISU or U of H rooting allegiance enjoyed immensely, and you just came out on the short end of it by about the tightest margin you can.
Yep, exactly.
Would love a rematch. Obviously, you're not going to get in the regular season. Would love to maybe beat these guys in the Big 12 tournament. And you know what? We won't get to the salty hater stuff about them chanting mean stuff at Chris Sinak and JoJo Tugler, but I'll just say it, Bobby, wouldn't hate seeing them leave the NCAA tournament early, and if that makes me a salty hater, so be it. The glove fits, all that stuff.
Agreed wholeheartedly.
Bobby, you ready to put this one behind us and get into the week to come's games?
Let's do it.
First one will be on Saturday, one that I think we've all had mentally circled on the calendar since we basically knew who the home Big 12 opponents for the season were many months ago. That would be the current number 4 ranked Arizona Wildcats, team that spent a good chunk of this current season rightfully as the top team in the country. And as we record tonight, the only Big 12 team rated higher than your Houston Cougars and KenPom. There are things in this matchup that favor the Cougs. The fact that this game is at the Fertitta Center, chief among them, and some of the matchup specifics that I'm sure we will both dive into here. But make no mistake, even at home and with a bona fide great team like the one the Cougars have, Arizona is an extremely challenging opponent. Yes, the Wildcats are entering this current week on a 2-game losing streak. They lost on Saturday in Tucson after hosting College Game Day to a Texas Tech team that the Cougars actually found a way to beat in their home head-to-head with the Red Raiders. But this U of A team still is a group with an enviable combination of veterans who understand what Tommy Lloyd wants to do and also crazy talented freshmen, at least one of whom I think will be a high lottery pick this coming summer. Probably sounds familiar to Cougar fans. I would say that in the most general terms describes this year's U of H team, though I would say the Wildcats have relied even more on freshmen than the Cougars, as we'll get into. Bobby, what have you learned about this Arizona team that you would like to share?
Yeah, with this Arizona team, it's kind of funny to look at their KenPom. Their rankings the rankings of these two teams really kind of made me laugh, if I'm being honest. The space between our offense and their defense is 6 positions, right? So like they have the 11th, we have the 5th. It's the same on the other side. So these teams are going to be super evenly matched. Arizona is number 3 in KenPom. We are number 4, unless I am not going to my tab fast enough to get there. I was correct. They are 3. We are 4.
Yep.
And you never know what could happen tonight, right? No, but in all seriousness, it's there's some things about this matchup that really scares me and some that gives me hope. The first thing that scares me is their ability to keep you from scoring inside the arc. And the Cougs are slightly above average in percentage of points inside the arc. Next up is going to be their ability to get offensive rebounds. The Cougs have definitely tightened this up over the last couple of games, but yeah, the Cougs still ranked 188th in offensive rebound percentage allowed. And Arizona can also get to the line fairly well. The Cougs have always and will always, under Kelvin Sampson, send teams to the line. It's just how we play defense. It's going to happen. It's very rare that you have a game where we have less fouls than the other team. And more than likely, it's a team playing like Kelvin Sampson wants to play, a very tough defense that's going to get very physical with you. That's one of the reasons why I have a hard time complaining about refs as well is, yeah, we get pretty physical as well. So the biggest thing that gives me hope overall is the fact that Arizona just flat out refuses to take three-pointers. They are 363rd in the country out of 365 teams in three-point attempt percentage. They just do not shoot the three. I like the idea of them attacking the paint and attacking right into the reigning Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year. If JoJo Tugler can stay out of foul trouble, I feel pretty good about this game. The guy to watch for them, obviously, is Pete. Stud do-it-all freshman. Another weird matchup size-wise for the Cougs. He comes in at 6'8". You look possibly the guy that they've kind of turned to the last couple of games against guys of his size is going to be Chris Sinak.
That was my thought too.
I thought Sinak's done really well the last couple of games against really good players of about that size. Sinak's length really seems to get in their way, and Sinak is just a little bit more. This sounds weird considering what we've seen from JoJo. Just a little bit better at staying in front of quicker, smaller guys than I'd say JoJo Tugler is.
Yeah, and obviously you have JoJo giving up 6 or 7 inches in height to hold on, I'm gonna get his name right. I made sure I even gave myself a little pronunciation guide. Their Lithuanian big man, Notorious.
Yeah.
Nailed it. Even though he's giving up 6 or 7 inches in size to the guy, I think JoJo's wingspan makes that much less of a mismatch than you would think. I'm kind of with you on that one. Really, the most impressive thing to me about Arizona's roster construction is they were able to bring back useful players who started most of last year as bench guys for this season. I think more specifically, seniors Anthony Delorso and Toby Awaka. For offensive rebounding percentage, Awaka is literally the best in the entire country among qualified players, top 20 nationally in defensive rebounding as well. Delorso has fallen back a bit after being, I would say, their best three-point shooter last season, but I wouldn't give him too many decent looks when he's on the floor on Saturday. Both of those guys, for any of the flaws that led to them losing their starting spots to their various highly coveted freshmen, those two are still much better than your average bench guy, even on other really good teams. I think is part of why Arizona's been so dangerous. But the guy who really is the straw that stirs the drink for them, the guy who will lead any scouting report, isn't one of those trio of excellent freshmen. No knock on Koa Pete, Braden Burries, and Ivan, the Russian guy whose name I'm not going to try to butcher at this point. But Bradley's a veteran, tough guy. He's going to be facing the Cougs for the 4th time in his college career. And I'm sure Bradley is going to be motivated in no small part by what was one of his worst offensive games last season when these two teams met in Tucson. It's coming off, I would say, by his pretty lofty standards, subpar performances in their losses to Kansas and Tech. Bradley's not the world's most efficient scorer, but he's a veteran who can win tough games against good opponents while also being the tip of the spear for an elite defensive team. Certainly Arizona's best since Tommy Lloyd's taken over and capable of also running the point. What it was a very frenetic and up-tempo offense. And Bradley's played at Fertitta before. I hate to bring up a bad memory, Bobby, but he was on that 2022-23 Alabama team that beat then number 1 U of H at Fertitta, had 12 points and 4 assists off the bench for the Tide in that one. And again, plenty has been said about their star freshmen, Koa Pete and Braden Burries. They're both very good players who I expect in both cases to be playing NBA basketball in the not-too-distant future. But worth highlighting Motias Krivas, who I mentioned a bit ago, who would have been a big part of last year's team had he not gotten hurt in December of 2024. neither Krivas nor Koa Pete are true stretch big men. They can shoot the three, but as you pointed out, Arizona generally doesn't do a lot of that. And for the season, Krivas and Pete have combined for 27 3-point attempts. So you probably won't see a ton of those on Saturday. I think what concerns me is that both Pete and Krivas are both plus offensive big men who can draw fouls. And man, any scenario where you're missing JoJo and or Sanak for long stretches of this game is going to make it a difficult one to win.
Yeah, I agree.
We'll say not all doom and gloom. There are things I like about this matchup. UA likes to run tempo about as much as any opponent we've seen this season, and as deliberate as the Cougs are, not really something we've struggled to see this year's Cougar team deal with. I really don't think they mind being set up, and at times have been good at imposing their tempo on opponents. Arizona, for as outstanding as they are offensively, they're just fine at shooting the three-pointer, which is an improvement over what was, I think, their biggest glaring weakness offensively last season, but they're not good like Tech or Iowa State were. They don't take a ton of shots from deep, which that's been one of your, I think, really most consistent defensive kryptonite in the current season. And yes, Arizona is an elite defensive opponent, but they're not going to turn you over that often. And on the offensive side, haven't been great at taking care of the ball themselves. If the Cougars can turn some of those turnovers into points, really get the crap for Tita into this one, I do think the Wildcats will struggle. Top 5 opponent, of course, almost goes without saying you need to be at your best to win, but I'm excited to see how it looks. I'm optimistic about the Cougs coming off that tough loss at Hilton, and I'm very excited to be there in person in several days watching this one with co-host Emeritus Dustin, and I'm sure it'll be a fun time at Fertitta.
Yeah, I think with this game being at Fertitta, I see the Cougs winning this game just like we saw at Iowa State. I think if you play that game versus Iowa State on a neutral court, I think there's a pretty good chance the Cougs win there. I think Fertitta is going to give that kind of bounce to the Cougs here, and I think if the Cougs can jump out on them early, use the crowd, kind of like we saw Iowa State do, and really establish themselves. I think the prediction I had for Iowa State is kind of the same prediction. Granted, I was wrong, but it's kind of the same prediction that I have for this U of H versus U of A game.
And next Monday night, we have our second Big Monday showdown in a row. And for the third time in 3 seasons, we will be playing the Kansas Jayhawks at Phog Allen Fieldhouse. Darren Peterson is obviously the headline guy because anytime you have the potential number 1 pick in the next NBA draft on the roster, that player is going to draw the headlines. Not to mention the fact that you've also kind of had an off-court story bleeding into it with Peterson's minutes very clearly being managed. He's also only played 14 of the Jayhawks, 25 total games to date. And I'm not generally wild about a guy playing less, but if he genuinely has a lingering soft tissue injury, probably good his injuries are managed and his soon-to-be lucrative and long NBA career isn't derailed because, I want to see him play 37 minutes against Colorado or something like that. But I mean,
right.
As good as Pearson is, in my opinion, the biggest reason KU is noticeably better than the most recent 2 completed seasons before this one is the fact that the team around Peterson is clearly gelling better than some of the more recent ones. Bobby, what have you learned about the Jayhawks?
Yeah, I think you said it there. One of the things that I heard Samsey kind of complain about, and I don't think the Big 12 did us any favors, is giving this when this game happened. One, how do we not have a Big Monday game? We are back-to-back champions of this conference. You make us go on the road back-to-back Mondays, and then to top it off, you're making us do a Big Monday versus Kansas at Phog after playing Arizona. Now, I know Arizona's at home, but come on, man. Sam, without looking, do you know who Kansas is coming off of playing on Saturday before they play us on Monday?
The way you're talking about it, I don't know it, but I'm assuming someone who is not good. Bobby, who are they coming off of on Saturday?
The Cincinnati Bearcats.
Yeah, I mean, all respect to Cincy, who I think is better than a decent number of Big 12 teams. It's not the same level of challenge that we're facing.
Exactly, and they get to host us at, they're having us at their places. So it just that was kind of the first thing that just kind of irks me looking at this game. You mentioned him. It's really tough to look at this team on KenPom and this Kansas team on KenPom to kind of see what they actually are.
Real quick, I got some breaking news about the game that we just previewed.
Yeah, what's up?
Koa Pete out. for
Oh,
Saturday's
hello.
game in Houston because of a
Hello.
muscle strain in the lower leg area. Will be evaluated next week and will return to court when cleared by the medical staff. Sorry.
Interesting. No. That is definitely something to break into our. It's weird to have breaking news on something that's going to be released in like a couple hours, and
Hey, at least
people.
it didn't break Wednesday morning. Like, oh, cool.
Yeah,
I'm glad I talked about
yeah, no,
a
for
court
sure,
Pete matchup that will never happen.
for sure. No, but it's tough to look at this Kansas team's Ken Palm, right? And the reason why I say that is you mentioned him, Darren Peterson doesn't play like half their games, and they're two different teams, right? Like their offense, I think on Ken Palm is 44th, 45th. I have it pulled up here.
It's
I
like
should
low
just get
40s.
the
Yeah,
chart. Yeah.
yeah.
And when you look at it, they're two different teams. So what are they with Darren Peterson? What are they without him? When he does play, he averages 20 points and 4 rebounds a game. I think this Kansas team is a top 10 Ken Palm team with him. I mean, they're number 15 currently, let alone if you add arguably the best player in the upcoming draft. I'm sure they'd be top 10, top 6, top 7, somewhere in there. Um, and it's so clear with him that they wouldn't be at that 44th in offensive Ken Palm. A big saving grace for the Cougs in this game is that the Cougs don't what the Cougs don't do well, the Jayhawks don't do well offensively, or what the Cougs do well, the Jayhawks don't do well offensively. The Jayhawks aren't great at getting to the line. They're not great at getting offensive rebounds, and those are two places where we talked earlier. The Cougs like to send teams to the line, and offensive rebounding allowing offensive rebounds has been a problem all season for the Cougs. It's gotten better, like I said earlier, but it's still not great. Look for this game to really change on those classic U of H things. Kansas can get a little leaky allowing offensive rebounds, and you saw Chris Sinak just last night in the Iowa State game get 3 offensive rebounds on 1 possession, and you saw this team and this coaching staff go absolutely wild over that. The Cougs love if you allow offensive rebounds. Kansas is not great at creating turnovers. The Cougs can benefit from that too. They can get a little loose with the ball, and the Cougs will absolutely take advantage of that as well on the defensive end. Kansas turns the ball over quite a bit. I also noticed Kansas bigman Flory Badunga is number 22 in the nation in block rate, and as a team, they rank number 2 in the country at block rate. But that being said, they don't generate a lot of steals. In fact, they're one of the lowest teams in the country at generating steals. So if you're not getting blocked by Badunga, you got a real chance of holding onto the ball, not turning it over, getting offensive rebounds. You put this game at Fertitta or a neutral site, and I think it's probably Cougs by 5. At Phog, who the hell knows, man?
Yeah, I'm pretty much with you there. You covered a lot of what I was going to cover about in terms of the team matchup. Just what I said earlier, and yeah, definitely you subtract Peterson from any team, like the team is going to be worse for it. But this team also last Monday beat Arizona at Phog Allen without Darren Peterson, which tells you it's still a very good team, even if Darren Peterson either isn't playing or isn't playing 35, 40 minutes a game. Really hit on portal guys, which I think was one of the big problems of the previous 2 classes. Melvin Council, their point guard, comes in from St. Bonaventure. He's been a great fit along with fellow veteran transfer Trey White, who most recently played for Illinois. Flory Badunga, familiar with him from his freshman season last year. He's taken the step forward that if you're a KU fan that you probably would have wanted to see from his freshman sophomore season. Freshman big man Bryson Tiller is also one to watch for the long term. But like you said, they're elite defensively, the Jayhawks, but they don't force a lot of steals, a little more mortal offensively, shoot the ball fine, but not great, but don't go to the free throw line a ton as a team. And despite having Badunga and Bryson Tiller, really aren't that great at grabbing offensive boards or conversely keeping opponents off the glass, which we'll certainly see the Cougars try to do a fair amount next Monday. Profile is saying about his ISU for turning the ball over offensively. Not amazing, but solidly in the range of good. And like you said, definitely jumped out to me as well. They're one of the worst teams in the country at forcing turnovers, which is quite a different experience than what Iowa State threw at us last night. If the Cougs can maybe create a bit more havoc defensively than you did last night in Ames, I think you put some real pressure on the Jayhawks. But winning in Phog Allen is super hard. Doing it 2 years in a row, which the Cougars would be doing if they win next Monday night, is next to unheard of. But I will also never doubt the ability of this Cougar team to do the potentially unheard of.
Yep.
And somewhat to our surprise, we are following up our usual leadoff Cougar men's basketball section with an early season Cougar baseball weekend of performances. It's actually giving the two of us some hope for the season to come. Of course,
it is what kills you, though.
It is. Hope is what kills you. Acknowledging that we've played still less than 10% of the season. We are multiple months away from the college baseball postseason. But I'm going to be honest, Bobby. My expectation was U of H would go 2-2 Puerto Rico, beat Manhattan, and then split with the lesser two power conference schools, and then lose comfortably to the one legitimately good opponent, Wake Forest, that you were going to see in Puerto Rico. And that decidedly did not happen. Cougs blew out Wake in the opener on Friday 8-2, then won the remaining 3 games to start your 2026 season 4-0. Maybe in 3 months, Bobby, we look back on this as an outlier, an early season result that didn't end up being indicative of how good the 2026 version of Cougar baseball turned out to be. I'm still willing to acknowledge that. But if you're going to be fair and evaluate this team on current season's results, they looked pretty dang good in Puerto Rico. Bobby, what were your big takeaways from our first weekend of baseball?
Yeah, man, just my first line in my notes is, are we legit? But in a weekend where you were going to be pretty happy, like you said, going 2-2, and if you could come away 3-1 in it, you were going to be like, oh man, we got some stuff here. Yeah, sweeping the weekend, including a win versus number 21 Wake Forest, is massive. And it's not just like you got into some slugfest with them and you won 15-14 or you know, you won 1-0 and your bats didn't do anything, but your pitching was great. Like, it wasn't any of that. You just beat them. The biggest question mark in my opinion, and I think in yours as well, heading into the season, was the pitching. And while it's still very early, the initial results are positive. A problem we've seen over the last few years is just giving up free bases. You saw that a lot with errors, with walks, with hit by pitches. You would just give up free bases constantly, and pretty great start with 30 strikeouts and 13 walks on the weekend. Schmitz gets you 4 innings of shutout baseball versus Wake Forest. Richie Ramon gets 5 innings with 1 earned run. And in the final game versus UW, you get a little squirrely, but that was clearly a bullpen game where you're just throwing a bunch of guys and you're like, go get me an inning in a third, go get me an inning in 2/3. And your bats came through for you there. Offensively, I loved what I saw from Jackson La Lima, slugged 571, 3 doubles with 2 stolen bases. That's pretty big there. Put up 25 runs over the weekend as a team, 6.25 runs per game. No matter how bad your pitching is, if you can average 6.25 runs per game, which I know you're not going to all season, right? But if you're consistently putting across 5 runs a game, you got a pretty good shot at winning a bunch of your games there. If you can continue that, like I said, you're going to be pretty good in 2026.
The win over Wake Forest is obviously a bit load bearing because we'll be honest, if you beat BC, Washington, Manhattan, and lose to Wake, I'm not saying you and I are coming on here feeling negative. I would guess in this hypothetical, the two of us are still pretty positive, but the Wake win gives Cougar baseball something we really haven't seen much of in the last several seasons, a resume cornerstone non-conference win. And it's way too early to say what Wake Forest is, but if the last several seasons are any indicator, Wake is probably at least an NCAA tournament team, and you now have a win against one of those teams away from home on your resume. Like that's good. That's probably going to be nothing but a net positive. And the dominant fashion you did it against them is notable. Cougs put up a crooked number on Wake in the 3rd inning of that one and then never let the deficit get any less than 4 runs from there. I'm not going to overstate what BC and Washington were last year, but both finished pretty comfortably ahead of the Cougs in RPI last season. Would be surprised if either of those is the same level of resume boosting win as Wake, but both are probably going to be something better than a lot of the recent years kind of empty calorie early season wins that you would see Cougar baseball get in the opening month or few weeks of the season. And you were right to lead with pitching. That's the biggest thing that has to jump off the page to anyone looking at these first 4 games. And yeah, the Monday finale against Washington was higher scoring, but that was your fourth game in as many days. And if you've watched even some college baseball, you kind of know that the Sunday weekend series college baseball game, or maybe a midweek one, it's going to be a little pitching optional. And I will note in that finale that 4 of the 7 Cougar pitchers were making their collegiate debut. 5 of the 7 weren't on this roster a season ago. So you're pretty deep into the staff. But the number that I think has me most bullish about this team's long-term pitching prospects were the walks, or the lack of walks. You mentioned the 13 walked batters in 36 total innings. Cougar hitters drew 26 walks in 34 innings from opposing pitchers. Like, that's good. Like, that is going to be a winning recipe for the rest of the season if you even come close to keeping that up. And you also only hit 2 batters in the opening weekend while your opponents hit 11. If you can be, more often than not this season, the pitching staff that allows fewer free base runners, the wins are going to follow. It is almost a perfect correlation between good baseball teams and the ones that don't put a bunch of free runners on base. And again, way too early to say if this means anything big picture, but in recent seasons, we've kind of seen the Cougar pitching staffs favor guys who had the high end swing and miss stuff, but also with that kind of had questionable control. And who knows, maybe bringing in Matt Gardner, a guy who played and coached under former Coug pitching guru Frank Anderson, means maybe the staff is back to prioritizing pounding the zone as opposed to swinging and miss stuff over everything. Maybe wish casting here, but something I definitely noticed through these first 4 games. And not that your starting pitchers did badly. 3 of the 4 certainly gave you a chance to win, and all 4 at least avoided getting run from the game super early. But it's not as if your starters went super deep every game. You only had to look at your top relief options. I would guess we have already seen the vast majority, if not all, the pitchers who are going to take the mound this season for the Cougs last weekend in Puerto Rico. I mean, even in that Monday win over Washington that you and I have mentioned, where clearly you were throwing a lot of your youngest, maybe least proven arms, staff still only combined for 3 walks and 10 strikeouts, which is never a combo I'll complain about from the pitching staff. It was a stress test for your pitching staff. You had 4 games in a row, and not being at the point of the year where you could expect your stars to really go 7-8 innings deep. And you have to say the pitching staff passed with flying colors. I wanted to shout out 2 relievers specifically, Chris Cinta and Tyler Bryan. Cinta in the opener against Wake threw 4 really valuable scoreless innings, never let the Demon Deacons back in it, and didn't let them get any momentum after they tagged Ryan Rodriguez for a couple of runs to cut the lead to 6-2. And in the Monday finale against Washington, he came back on in relief, gave you some veteran calm in a game where it's kind of a bullpen game, so your younger guys maybe were struggling a little bit, got you out of a bases loaded 1-out jam in the 7th, and then finished that high-scoring finale win with his second clean outing of the weekend. And last season, Cinta was one of those guys, his numbers didn't jump off the page at you, but I remember he had stretches in 2025 of really being one of your most reliable, especially in Big 12 play, non-Antoine Jean guys. And if he's taken another step forward when it comes to the free passes and also being a lefty who has good swing and miss stuff, I think he can be one of your go-to high leverage guys this weekend. And shout out Tyler Bryan, because I think I said in the preview, I was sort of skeptical of his resume at Northwestern State as a starting pitcher, but man, maybe the Cougs correctly identified him as a good candidate to make that switch from starter to high leverage reliever. And he had 2 clean outings, got the saves against BC and Manhattan. I think really got a glimpse of, I think, Cinta and Bryan being your go-to guys in the close or, higher leverage moments of the season. I haven't talked as much about the hitting, which I think was good. If anything, it's a positive to me that you didn't absolutely just rake this weekend and still found a way to win 4 games. You didn't get a homer until Perez hit one, I believe, in the Xavier Perez in the finale against Washington, but a lot of gap power on this team, trying to overreact one weekend, but Blake Fields had one of the best weekends we've seen from a freshman in years in this program. It used to be pretty regular around here that we'd have at least a handful of impact freshman pitchers or position players, and it's just happened less in the recent seasons, but he was the only freshman I name-checked in our position player preview, and feeling pretty confident he's going to be an exciting mainstay in the field and in the lineup for the rest of the season for the Cougs.
Yeah, agreed.
It just feels like it's been so many years, Bobby, since Cougar baseball had an opening weekend where you left with quality resume building wins, and it looks sustainable the way these 4 wins did. I'm not to the point where I'm saving for lodging in a rental car for a June baseball regional just yet, obviously, but I think if you've suffered through the lows of the past 5 or 6 seasons as a Cougar baseball fan, you're allowed to feel good. You're allowed to feel bullish about what we saw in Puerto Rico.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with that. Like we said, 2-2 was kind of the goal. 3-1 was going to be like, oh my god, it's you don't want to get too far over your skis here, but there's reason to be excited.
Pains me to do this, Bobby. I wanted to also shout out DFW sports streaming site Victory Plus for doing a more than acceptable job for being a free streaming service airing college baseball. I just literally assumed until Friday it was on some service that I'd have to pay $30 for, and I was just like, no, I'm not paying $30 to Flow Sports.
We're going 2008 style, watching Game Tracker.
Yeah, I'm just gonna Game Tracker this, and then like, wait, it's free and easy to sign up for. It actually has a decent broadcast. It was pretty cool. Shout out Victory Plus.
Huge thing in the Dallas market. It was funny. You and Dustin were like, I think it was Dustin that initially said like, "Oh man, imagine my surprise when the sketchy service." And I was like, and then like I saw it and I didn't even think anything of it. I didn't even think anything of it until I was like, oh yeah, I forgot we're playing at 8 a.m. Let me pull it up while I'm at the gym and I can listen to it. And I was like, where's it on? What's it on? And you had even said like, hey man, I made an account on the website with for us to use, blah blah. And I was like, what? And then I pulled it up. I was like, oh yeah, where's the game actually taking place? Victory Plus. They're calling this thing sketchy. This is awesome. I love Victory Plus, baby.
Yeah, Victory Plus appreciators here, both of us. And in the weekend to come, because of the busier than usual opening weekend, Cougs will understandably not play a midweek game. This week we'll be back in Houston hosting UTRGV, sandwiched between last weekend's opening event in Puerto Rico and a multi-team event they're playing up in Frisco. The following weekend, we'll say, don't let the name fool you, UTRGV was a really good team last season who just played a super competitive home series to start the year against Kansas, who themselves were an NCAA tournament team last season. If you only saw the name, you might think this is just Whitting hunting for easy early season wins, but I would say the 3 games at Trader Park this weekend will be anything but easy wins. In my opinion, this is and I looked all the seasons to confirm, I think this is the toughest home opening series that U of H has had since Wake Forest came to U of H to start the 2017 season. Vaqueros, like the Cougs, didn't hit for amazing average their opening weekend against KU, but hit for good power. They had 5 home runs in their first 3 games. Armani Raygoza hit 2 of those 5 home runs, unsurprisingly. Guy's coming off a great 2025 season where he hit for 17 homers and was one of the top average guys in the Southland Conference as well. Didn't pitch as well, hence why they lost the series to Kansas, but Harrison Thayer threw 5 scoreless in their opening night win over the Jayhawks. I expect he will start opposite Paul Schmitz for the Cougs on Friday night. One thing that also stood out to me is the Vaqueros had 5 different relievers throw multiple innings of at least somewhat effective relief last weekend. So like the Cougs, the Vaqueros have at least shown some pitching depth here early in the season. Bottom line, Bobby, I'll be pretty happy if the Cougs take 2 of 3 this weekend. And if we get a sweep, I'm going to be fucking ecstatic.
Yeah, man. My first line is don't sleep on them because of the name. This is probably UTRGV's best sport. The Cougs, they beat the Cougs in Houston last year in a midweek game. Ask me how I know. I was there. Lucky me, right? They went 1-2, like you said, versus a salty Kansas squad that was picked preseason 5th in the Big 12. Honestly, they played Kansas pretty well. The Saturday score is a little deceitful. They lost 10-3, but KU scored 6 of those runs in 1 inning. Sometimes it just gets away from me in a game like that. Otherwise, the other 2 games they won 1, and I think they lost by 1 or 2 to a pretty salty Kansas team. So yeah, pretty difficult home opener here for the Cougs.
Yeah, no doubt. And we will stay on the diamond here for a bit to discuss Cougar softball, who had their own very exciting weekend of action to talk about. Really just can't beat this weekend overall for good bat and ball sports feelings. Cougar softball went 4-1 in their second weekend hosting multiple opponents at home. And I think after the opening weekend, we felt good, but we also knew that HCU and Fairfield weren't the highest level of opponent. This weekend, you had 3 power conference opponents on the schedule, none of whom were top 25 or anything like that, but also none of whom felt like gimme wins either. I actually re-listened to our softball segment from last week, and verbatim, I said, Bobby, if the Cougs went 4-1 against the slate, that I'd be really excited about it. And so I guess, Bobby, I can't be anything but really excited about what I saw from the softball program this past weekend. What were your big takeaways from another 4-1 weekend? Blech. for the Cougs.
Yeah, the highlight will definitely be the 6-run walk-off 7th inning versus Michigan. You did lose pretty badly against Penn State, but against the better teams, just kind of over the weekend against the two better teams that you probably saw in Michigan and Penn State, you did see the pitching staff struggle a bit, but something we haven't seen so far this year and that we kind of saw last year, even though, you and I weren't the biggest softball followers, but you can go back, look at stats and things like that. Um, this team did struggle pitching wise versus not as good teams, and they don't look like they're doing that this year. So very much a floor is being risen a little bit so far this season in what I've seen. What happens in Big 12 play, completely different question there, but overall it feels like an improvement over last year's team. The Bats are still doing well and have shown that they can carry a lot of the weight that they need to. Maddie Hartley had an incredible weekend, 4 home runs, 7 of 15 on the weekend. That works, buddy. That works.
I'm not leaving the weekend with any unrealistic expectations. 2 of the 3 power conference opponents did do pretty well against your pitching, but also that your hitters were able to make things happen against opponents that are a cut above HCU and Fairfield is its own the big positive takeaway. I wanted to shout out London Park, whose pitching we weren't entirely convinced by in the opening weekend's games. Gave you probably the pitching performance of the weekend, coming on in relief in the opener against Pitt through 5 innings of 1-run ball after Nevaeh Brown gave up a run in each of her first 2 innings. Park only had 1 free base runner her entire outing, a hit by pitch. Didn't allow much traffic from hits either, which you'd probably say were the main problems in her first weekend outings for the Cougs. Finished that one off, the Pitt win, with her first collegiate win and a 1-2-3 7th inning. And the clutch hitting was incredible in both of those wins over power conference opponents. Against Pitt, the Cougs put up a 4 spot after going into the bottom of the 6th, trailing 3-2. Really took advantage of Pitt miscues. Kylie Griffin draws a walk to lead off the inning. Jordy Wilkins, while pinch running for Griffin, took second on a wild pitch, then scored the tying run on Arani Esparza. First pitch RBI single. Esparza would score a little later on Isabel Cintron's single and error by the Pitt center fielder. Fellow freshman Riley Gardner kept the inning going with a single, and Cintron scored the 6th and final run on an Ariel Redmond RBI ground out. Redmond also got the Cougs going earlier in this game with a 3rd inning solo dinger. She's been fantastic here in the early season in the lineup, along with Hartley. And then you had an even crazier comeback, down 9-4 going to the bottom of the 7th against Michigan on Saturday night. But Isabel Cintron leads off the homer. Wilkins keeps the rally alive with a bunt single, was brought home 2 batters later with Redmond, who walks between them via a Maddie Hartley solo homer. Cuts lead to 9-8. McKenna Mitchell walks immediately after, and then the next batter, Riley Gardner, walks it off with her 2nd home run of the game, capping off an unbelievable night here early in her college career as a freshman. Gave the Cougs a hard-fought 10-9 win over a Michigan team that was probably the best one the Cougs have seen this young season, certainly the best you saw in this tournament. Ended up being the Wolverines' only loss in their Houston trip and their 2nd total in this young season. And I thought it was equally important. The Cougs didn't play around with their food in either of the games against the opponents who would have been a damaging loss to take, the games against Lafayette and UIW. Lafayette put up a 3 spot in the first inning, but Cougs dominated that one to the level you'd expect, won that one 12-4, and then shut out UIW 7-0 in the Sunday finale. We've only played 9 games in a 50-something game season, kind of like we did the baseball team. Acknowledge it's early. It'd be a fool's errand to make too many bold predictions by this point, but this team clearly can hit at a good level against quality competition and has shown enough, at the risk of speaking for you, my co-host, that I think we're both feeling pretty decent about these first 9 games of the Christy Schoonmaker era.
Yeah, definitely don't feel like, this team's suddenly going to make a super regional or even a regional, but you really kind of feel like this team is going to be better than they have been the last couple of years. Even with, I think the thing that has surprised me the most is you're getting these results with a lot of the same roster that you had last year. It shows how much coaching can really change what a team looks like. And maybe not having such a toxic atmosphere in a locker room. You know what?
Maybe so, Bobby.
Interesting how that works.
The toughest test of the season will certainly come this weekend. Cougs will be on the road for the first time at the Cajun AC Louisiana Clash, hosted by McNeese in beautiful Lake Charles, Louisiana. The Cougs will play 5 games in 3 days, a doubleheader on Friday with Mizzou and McNeese in the evening. another doubleheader on Saturday with McNeese in the earlier game and Mizzou in the evening, and then a Sunday afternoon finale against UL Lafayette to finish out the weekend. Quick thoughts on the opponents. Mizzou has a largely new staff, started the year 4-7, but the record is kind of deceptive. Mizzou played in two pretty tough fields in Florida, multi-team events, and finished their most recent one with back-to-back wins over good FAU and Duke teams. McNeese is a perennially pretty good mid-major softball program and already has a good non-conference win over Ole Miss under their belt this season, but they also have losses to Austin Peay in UIC from their most recent weekend playing. Actually, former UH pitching coach Hope Troutwine is on McNeese staff, and the Cowgirls' biggest struggle so far this season has been pitching, though I would say having a game against Texas Tech on the schedule probably skews your numbers a little bit. And ULL will be another good test to close out the weekend. They're rebuilding a bit. They lost their very good head coach, Jerry Glasgow, along with some of their best players to Texas Tech. Have started the year 6-3. They have a win over Ole Miss in there as well, but also losses to Prairie View and Jacksonville State. Like the Cougs, they'll be coming off a full weekend schedule of their own. They're not playing the full slate of this event. They're playing at home and doing a doubleheader on the Sunday game of this event with Mizzou and the Cougs. So I would imagine, considering it's the end of the weekend, considering it's two teams that have played a lot of softball, runs won't be in short supply in that one. Classic final day of a weekend series game, but I think multiple games that are winnable in this weekend. I think if you come out of it at least 3-2, you're feeling pretty good. If you come out at 2-3, you're not even really feeling that bad either. I think this was like the first time, and this was with a lot of the previous coaches' seasons, you'd have strong first weekend or two, and then you get to that first road event. I believe we played in this one before. I remember I was, believe it was when I was out in Arizona watching the Cougar baseball opener 4 years ago, that Cougar softball had this promising start to the season and then just went to Louisiana and got waxed. I think that's just what you're trying to avoid here, is just keep the positive momentum. We have realistic expectations of what this team can be, but this team is also flashed enough that I believe there's a good chance you're not going to go to Louisiana and just see your hope for a decent season die.
Yeah, I think this is certainly a weekend where you'd like to get two of the five. If you can get three of the five, you're playing some really good teams. Interesting thing you mentioned about Ulala in this one is they're actually playing in a tournament, because I was going to see how they did so far this season to see what kind of team they might be. They're actually playing a tournament in Baton Rouge, which is, and then they're like, all right, we'll play the last day of this one. It is very weird. Not bad.
So
like
too.
I'm not saying it's bad. It's just kind of one of those things I was like, that's kind of interesting.
We'll close tonight with a couple of country club sports that we were both very excited about. Eagle-eared listeners will know that we had this planned last week, but the volume of stuff we had last week pushed it out to this current episode. But this week we have the return of the men's golf season, and with that, the return of Cougar Golf Corner.
The golf team starts the season, the men's golf team starts the season ranked 50th, right on the cusp, kind of in there to make the NCAAs with automatic qualifiers and stuff. You usually find the 50th team in the country in basketball might not make it, but they're certainly a bubble team. Would you necessarily disagree with that, Sam?
Yeah, it's about accurate, yeah.
The good news, though, is you return almost your entire starting five from last year. Your best player, Hudson Weibel, is back. Your top four last year of Weibel, Grant Doggett, Chi Chun Chin, and Huan Yi Chin are back. The question really becomes, who is your fifth player? I'd lean towards senior transfer Kevin On, tied for first at the Horizon League Championship last year, and is actually ranked higher than a couple of those returners that I mentioned heading into the season. Another name to watch is Enrique Carg. He's from Guadalajara, Mexico. He's transferred from Utah State. And I was actually able to speak to Coach Dismuke about him. Like the day he signed, there was an alumni event up here in DFW, and Coach Dismuke was the coach that they brought up. And I was kind of talking to him about it, and he was super excited. And one of the things that he pointed out, and this just to me blew my mind, that like, this is the level that coaches look at things. Like, we as fans, Sam, you and I run this podcast, and we look at things at, I would say, a different level than a lot of people do, just because we're rewatching games and we're doing that kind of stuff. But to see the level a Division I coach goes at their sport, it blew my mind when he mentioned Enrique Carg's. He's from Guadalajara. You look at his scores from Utah State. When he played in rounds where the temperature was cold, where it was like a cold day, he shot worse, like substantially, than he did in warm weather. And Coach District sees that and goes, "We're in Houston. We play in warm weather. Like, it's very rare that we're going to go somewhere super cold." And you look at the you look at the schedule and you're like, "Oh yeah, Laredo, Lake Charles, Cabo, Humble, Palm City, Florida, Augusta." Like, you're playing in warm weather, and that's just a thing that you don't think of that the Division I coach does. And so I thought that was it's fascinating. Now, like I said, the Cougs heading into the season are ranked 50th in the country, which, Sam, if you hear top 50 in the country, where do you think that puts you in the Big 12?
I know the men's golf in the Big 12 isn't nearly as rugged at the top as the women's. I'm going to say 6th.
But he put you 11th in the conference. Now, the interesting part here is that from 39th in the country to 50th in the country, which is where the Cougs are, you will find 5 Big 12 teams. So it's clear that there's a tier here, right? That you have those 5, you're all basically the same. Like, everything, your scoring averages, your ranking is where it is pretty much because of the tournaments you play in and how you perform in those. So you can do worse at a very competitive tournament, and that will do more for your points than winning something like the Cougs won today, which I'll get into, the Border Olympics, where there's no other ranked teams, right? So you have that top tier of teams, and then everything else is just kind of a jumbled mess. I didn't check today because I wrote this preview last week, but I think even the next team after U of H is like 54 or something like that. So it's all going to be the NCAA tournament, or the Big 12 tournament this year is going to be a lot of fun, because really you could go from finishing 12th, 13th to finishing 3rd, 4th, and that's a whole lot of fun. So that's kind of what to look forward to heading into the season. It's a lot less jumbled up and confusing as maybe the women's team is, because you do return all of those. You return basically everybody from your team.
Yeah, and as I'm sure you get to the Border Olympics, obviously not the toughest field, but at least you got it off to a good start in one of the annual curtain openers. That I think it would probably be a pretty bright red flag, even early in the season, when you don't want to overreact to any one result. If you didn't get both the individual and team titles at the Border Olympics, as the Cougars did this week.
Yeah, you absolutely want to win this one, and really you got the win, both the team and the team leaderboard. You won by 2 strokes over Tarleton and North Texas. That scares you maybe a little bit, but then the next tier was 7 over. You look at the scores, though, you do win the individual championship with Hudson Weipel, who went 8 under. Without his 8 under, you might not win this tournament. Grant Doggett finishes even on the tournament. Chi Chun Chin gets 1 under. He finishes 8th in this tournament. And then here's where you maybe want to see things tighten up a little bit. Swan Yi Chin finished 15 over, which not great. And then he had Kevin On, like I mentioned him earlier, 8 over on the day. And then you had a couple of individuals who came in, and it's just nice when you're hosting a tournament like this, even though it is down in Laredo. You were the host. You can just bring a bunch of players and just get them that college golf experience.
No doubt. And last but not least, in this jam-packed February pod, we will check in with a still undefeated Cougar tennis team here at the end of non-conference play that we'll talk about here in our latest Cougar Tennis Corner.
OGS, C-O, OGS, C-O, OGS.
The Cougs remained at home to finish up non-conference play against two of the tougher opponents that I expected we'd see before Big 12 play, UTSA and Stephen F. Austin, though I am not surprised that these two matchups ended up being decisive Cougar wins when it was all said and done. UTSA was first on Friday afternoon. As I expected when we previewed this one, UTSA posed more challenges for the Cougs in the opening doubles portion of the match, though that did not apply on court 3, where Petya Drame and Lisa Morosova made quick work of their opponents with a 6-0 win. I know I've said this before this season when talking about this team, but one of the things I'm most bullish about with this squad is how good they are on the lower courts, and that applies to both singles and doubles, and that's something I think will translate into success even as we get into the tougher part of the schedule in the coming weeks. I don't think there are a lot of court 3 doubles pairings who will be, I think, much better than Petya and Lisa. In singles, I don't think there will be court 5 and 6 matchups other than the handful of very best teams where Valeria Kroatina and Sophie Schouten aren't decent odds to win their respective matches. Obviously, when it comes to doubles, winning 1 of 3 doesn't get you anything, but I've also seen enough from the other 2 regular pairings, especially the newer one of Iva Seppa and Valeria Kroatina on court 2, that I'm optimistic doubles won't be the same level of struggle as it was last season, though, as Kat said in her post-match comments after UTSA, still probably an area where this Cougar team needs to get a bit better. And you saw in court 1 in this one, Sophie and Shems struggled a bit more, trailed at 4-3 at one point before they won their final 3 games to take the doubles point. Even Valeria were up 5-4 when that part of the match was called final. And as it's often happened in this season, the Cougars were really dominant once you got to singles against UTSA. And I would say, considering the strength of opponent relative to, say, the UT Arlington team that you saw the Cougs beat decisively early this season, just to use one example, I would argue Friday might have been your most complete singles performance of 2026. Cougs won on all 6 courts in straight sets as the teams played out all 6 matches, even after the Cougs clinched the overall match. Court 1 was by far Lisa's most dominant singles win of the season. She beat Israeli freshman Celine Absawi in straight sets, only lost 1 game the entire match. Valeria actually subbed in Sophie Schouten's usual spot in court 6. Sophie rested singles in this one, was just as dominant, only dropped 1 game in her match as well. My overlooked takeaway from this one, though, was Iva Seppa really dominating on court 4 in straight sets against sophomore Aoka Nagasawa, who had won her singles match the day before against Rice. Iva's looked like a much more confident player this spring, which is important off of last season, where she really faced a difficult slate of opponents as the Cougs Court 2 singles player, and her overall record unfortunately showed it for the season. Cougs were just as good in the second set as they collectively were in the first. The only match that was even remotely close was Petya Drame's, which she won 6-4 to clinch the overall, not clinch, but finish the overall match on court 5. Really dominant win, and one where the Cougs got a little bit of revenge for, I would say, one of last season's more frustrating non-conference losses. And you had the non-conference finale on Sunday against SFA, moved due to inclement weather that I believe came through Houston on Saturday. Not much drama in the doubles point in that one. Even Valeria dominated in court 2. They 6-0'd Ana Paula Chavez and Avery Kinsey. Lisa and Petya won comfortably on court 3, 6-3 as well, while Sophie and Shems were up 5-4 when that part of the match was called. With one notable exception, I would say the singles portion of the match was about as dominant as Friday's against UTSA. As is often been the case this season, Kat did some more experimentation with the singles lineup. She sat Alexia Lavinia Pujac. She actually competed against UTSA. Shems played in her place on court 2, and Eva played in Shems' regular spot on court 3. And that court 2 match was really the only area where the Cougs had anything that looked like a problem. Shems lost her first set to Sonia Ruth, who I actually name-checked as SFA's best singles player so far this season. She bounced back to win her second set, but lost a 10-point tiebreaker, 11-9, that the Cougs played in lieu of a full third set, because by that point U of H had long since clinched the overall match win. But the dominance on courts 3 through 6 was pretty unbelievable, Bobby. No Cougar player dropped more than 3 games total in their individual matches. Petya and Valeria only dropped 1 game each on courts 4 and 5 respectively. And Lisa also had a really impressive straight sets win. Ended up being the last one to go final, but she was going against Felicia Bach, who was one of the better singles players that I knew U of H would see during the non-conference portion of the schedule. Lisa dominated the first set 6-2. Bach made it a bit more interesting in the second, but Lisa closed that one out without having to go to tiebreaker with a 7-5 win. So that takes us to a 9-0 overall record, beat SFA 6-1 to close out non-conference play, and a 9-0 where the Cougs didn't drop a point until the very last non-conference match, a point that came after the match was mathematically won. Cougs only lost 6 sets combined in the singles portion of all 9 of those matches, only lost 3 doubles matches total, which only one of which has occurred after the opening weekend in California. And you're off to your best start since the 1990 season. Obviously, the Big 12 portion of the schedule will be much tougher. And when I looked at the non-conference before the season, I figured going 8-1 or 7-2 was pretty likely with an improved team and against this specific slate of opponents. But the fact that you've gone 9-0 and you've been exactly as dominant as this team has been and getting to that 9-0 is a statement. Exactly what it'll translate to come Big 12 play, still not sure, but I'm, if possible, even more excited than I was about a month ago when the season starts. So Cougs will have just under 2 weeks off before opening the conference schedule at home at the end of this month against Utah and BYU, which I know are 2 matches that Cat has had circled since the schedule came out. As you've probably gathered, Bobby, very excited about Cougar tennis in their non-conference season so far.
Heck yeah, man. Anytime you're undefeated, I don't care who you played and what the strength of strength of schedule says. If you're undefeated and you've only dropped 1 point, of which wouldn't have even happened had you not agreed to let it happen. Pretty sweet, man. Pretty sweet.
No doubt. All right, buddy, that's all the Cougar sports this week. Take us home.
All right, well, that is it for this episode of the Scott and Holman podcast. We appreciate you guys so much for listening. If you want to give us some feedback, you can find us on social media, on Twitter at SH Podcast. You can find us on Blue Sky at podcast.bsky.social. You can also email us, shpodcast@gmail.com. And if you really, really want us to care what you have to say, you can find us on Patreon. For $5 a month, you can get our premium content, including last night's instant react to the Iowa State game. $5 a month, like I said, you can go to patreon.com/shpodcast. Sam, I think I covered it all. What do we always say, buddy?
Go Cougs.
All right. Go Cougs! Let's go!